Well, good morning and welcome back to another episode of Emergent Leader Live. I'm Leah Abel here with our friend Kurt Bickel, the Dean of our Emergent Leader courses. How are you this morning, Kurt?
I'm blessed. I am blessed.
Good. Glad to hear it. Well, we are looking forward today to some conversation about something I think all of us have felt. Last week, I was having a conversation with our guest, the lovely Dr. Gretchen Jameson, and Kurt. And one of the things that Gretchen said that seemed to resonate with both of us, and I think will with you all as well, was what got you here won't get you there. And this idea that we've got an ongoing transformation that we live through as leaders in order to continue to be better leaders, stronger for those we serve, and more capable in the things that we do. And so looking forward to a conversation about that today with Gretchen. Kurt, I also was thinking, as we talked about this ongoing leadership, just about the philosophy and the ideas behind emergent leader and how that's connected to our topic today.
Yeah, originally we're going to call it legacy leadership because all the trainers were about on our last lap, and then that did not make a lot of sense for the reality of the kind of group we were hoping to connect with. And emerging has this idea too of the emerging forest, the forest that gets ahead of the rest. Stands out, if you will, stands out as leader. But also the word of emerging is that it's not static. It's always in flux. It's always in motion, and sometimes with setbacks, but nonetheless growing. And so our whole idea of emerging as leaders is important as we continue to grow in Christ and as we emerge as who we are as baptized people, and then who we are and what we do and who we connect with.
Well, we'll welcome Gretchen here in just a moment. But before we do that, I want to invite you, if you're watching with us live on YouTube or Facebook, would invite you to send questions or comments along the way. And if we're able to respond to those, we would love to do that. So thanks for being here and engaging with us today. Kurt, would you please introduce our guest?
I'd be more than happy to. It was like 20 plus, it was a long time ago, 20 plus years ago at a gathering meeting. And I'd been working with gatherings, and there was a new young leader, high school teacher, was going to be the media director. I didn't know her. I knew her indirectly, but it came time for her presentation, and I just took notice because there was clarity, there was confidence, there was a well organized presentation. She took command of the room, and there was no kind of that apologetic kind of thing for being one of the women in the room, one of the few women in the room. And I thought this is someone who I want to follow their career, see how they do in this fraternity kind of church we have. And if possible, I'd like to help her along the way. And it turns out that we've had a wonderful relationship over the years. And Dr. Gretchen Jameson is what I consider one of my esteemed colleagues and the opportunity to grow with. And she's given me many opportunities to work with her staff and with the organizations she's involved with. And I just really excited that she's with us today. She's currently the Chief Learning Officer at Casmeric Enterprises in Wisconsin. And it's another iteration of her emerging career. Welcome, Gretchen.
Yeah, good morning, Kurt. It is awesome to be here. And I have to say, I remember the first time meeting you at one of your nephew's confirmation events. We were eating pizza, Aldi's pizza that your sister always dresses up with more accoutrements on top of that pizza. And we were in her kitchen. And I remember thinking, oh, this is Kurt, because she always talked about you. And I was like, oh, I want him to think I'm cool. So you probably don't even remember that, but I have this memory of the first time sort of meeting you. Gosh, I was probably all of 22 years old, maybe not even. So anyway, been a long time, my friend.
What was that role that you had at the first gathering you were involved in?
I was the communications director for youth ministry. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You were still working at the high school as drama.
No, Terry Dittmer had convinced me to abandon ship. I had reached out and offered to volunteer, and he had a different plan. So I actually had never, maybe I shouldn't say this, I had never volunteered like officially as at a gathering. And there I was working for the gathering. I started that that would have been June of 2002.
No,
So
he made one of the best moves of his career.
Well, Gretchen, we would love to hear. I mean, I know you obviously started there. Now you're at Kasmeric, and there's been a few things in between. So catch us up a little bit on what transformation and transition and leadership has looked like for you over these last few years.
absolutely. You know, it's sort of a fun story to tell, but I'll tell it quickly, and I'll animate it around a consistent through line because I think that's important, especially when we think about how so many professionals today, and we read about this all the time, will not remain likely, you know, 30, 35, 40 plus years in one particular job, right? But rather will have a very varied career. And I think that's really kind of exciting when we think about how professional life and vocation, new vocationalism is changing, right? My through line is this. I love taking things that are and making them into what they might be. And I've enjoyed that since I was a young girl. And I used to set the dinner table while my parents were away. They were both teachers. At teacher meetings, they'd come home and I would have set the dinner table with my mother's best china and her pewter candlesticks. I just love taking what could be and making it what is. So that said, I started as a secondary educator at Milwaukee Lutheran High School in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, fresh out of undergrad from Concordia University, Nebraska, and which is actually where my parents went as well. And Kurt, I believe that is your alma mater too, right? Go Bulldogs. Yeah. So Concordia Seward brought me to Milwaukee. I student taught here, and then I taught at Milwaukee Lutheran. My husband is a director of Christian education, now pastor in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and he did his first work at St. Paul Lutheran Church in West Dallas, Wisconsin. We went from there back home to St. Louis. That never happens in church career, but it did for us. And I taught at Lutheran High School in North St. Louis. So go Crusaders, right? And had that wonderful experience. And it was there that I met Terry Dittmer, Reverend Terry Dittmer, who brought me on board at the National Youth Gathering. So there I had a chance to advocate for young people in different ways and to think about how we would animate and elevate the story that we were shaping in the lives of young people at the national church level. And that was a wonderful time. I still say it's one of the best teams I was ever a part of was the National Youth Gathering Youth Ministry Office team. And then went to Concordia Publishing House, where I helped Concordia Publishing House think about its storytelling in the context of the church and our brand and how we were shaping that identity and leveraging that identity. And that was really wonderful work. I learned an incredible amount about business. We won the Malcolm Baldrige National Award for Quality while I was there, which is, if you're in that space, that's actually quite a big deal in terms of continuous quality improvement. So I learned skills there that continued to shape me. Picked up a master's degree in public relations along the way because I figured I should probably go to school for what it was I was doing all over the place. And then went crazy, Kurt and Leah, and opened my own consultancy, and did that really because we finally were blessed with our first little one, and it gave me the opportunity not to work less, but to work more savvy, to be more strategic about my time and to balance family and career. And then ended up at Concordia University, Wisconsin, Ann Arbor, brought there by one of my other mentors, Reverend Dr. Patrick Ferry, whose son I had taught years ago at Milwaukee Lutheran. So I'd known Dr. Ferry for many years. And he invited me to join his team and to lead strategy for the university at really a remarkable time, right, in higher education and what is happening with higher education and change in that space, particularly for nonprofit, small private institutions, and certainly those in the faith-based space. So picked up a doctorate along the way at the University of Southern California in organizational change and leadership. Probably one of the most transformational learning experiences of my life, especially at the age and stage when I had the opportunity to pursue that degree. And then was asked to join the team at Kasmeric Enterprises. The gentleman who is our CEO and owner is a longtime friend of Concordia University. He is a philanthropist, an entrepreneur, a manufacturer, a chief executive. He has about 14 companies in his privately held portfolio, and he wants to put learning right at the heart of all of it. His personal mission is to impact 1 million lives a year, and he wants to do that through his workforce, but also in our community, ensuring that folks have access to opportunities to better themselves. There it is again, that through line, right? Who they are and who they'd like to be to take their potential to possible. And so the Kasmeric Center for Human Performance will do that. And so that's where I am, right? So it's this varied journey, but there is a consistency to it, I would say. And it's been a blessing to be in that mix all these years.
Well, I'd love to hear, Gretchen, more. What has that required of you as a leader? Like what shifts, even just maybe in this last transition, what shifts has that required of you as a leader as you're figuring out what this means? Because what got you here maybe won't get you there, to go back to what you said the other day.
Well, and that is taken, of course, from the title of Marshall Goldsmith's book of the same title, right? What got you here won't get you there. And it's important not to dismiss the first half of that, because what got you here, right? But in terms of continuing to develop as a leader, continuing to have clarity around your own leadership philosophy and really your personal mission, what it is that you feel called to do in the spaces and places where God places you and where you're led to serve. I think that, what got you here. But if you're committed to this journey, you're going to have to pick up new skills along the way. And so, Kurt, I guess I love the idea of emergent leader. I think sometimes people hear it and they think, oh, that means I'm novice. Maybe you are. But I would submit that being an emerging leader happens at an array of proficiency levels, right? If I'm continuously striving for that better and better opportunity to live out my own calling and my own philosophy. So let me tell you a story, Leah. Yesterday, I was thinking about this yesterday while I was in a meeting, learning all about the True Bend Cell 7000. You've probably never heard of it. It is a massive piece of equipment, a very expensive piece of equipment that is going to revolutionize how industry and manufacturing happens for us at our company and indeed at many companies. And I was in a meeting where the blueprints were rolled out for a new Industry 4.0 kind of advanced manufacturing plant that we're getting ready to open in our manufacturing company, one of the companies at Kasmeric Enterprises. And I was a first grade student learning about I have to look at the title, the True Bend Cell 7000. That's where I am as a leader today. What got me here. And I am blessed and grateful for so much learning along the way. But I'm learning again, right? I'm drinking from that fire hose. And so I'm bringing what I can bring into the room to benefit the organization where I am. But I'm also adopting a humility of posture and just listening and believing every day when I get out of bed that probably everyone I meet has something to teach me today. And I think that's key in where I'm at as a leader right now.
Yeah, just the intentionality. So a lot of times we all recognize we need to grow, we need to develop, and we actually use the word need. I need to. Sometimes we even say I want to, and that's very different from saying I'm going to, and I'm actually doing it. So it's easy to achieve a certain level and just kind of put in the clutch and go deeper and deeper in that one skill set. However, that starts to isolate you pretty quickly from what's going on and emerging in the world. So my journey too has been, and I really had the typical challenge of as a young youth worker, I was going to do the very best I can, and it was really self-serving to have these levels of my own sense of what was successful, and to achieve that until I satiated my sense of, well, now I've achieved it. And the reality was that was not even a half of the first step, because the real work needed to be done inside, and I had been avoiding the inside work, which was becoming more and more a reality, and actually becoming really dysfunctional in some ways, that I was avoiding the important stuff of the inside work while I was doing all of the transactional things, but not feeling much transformation in my life. So I started pursuing, and I thought, well, what are the things I'd like to do? Now, this fits my personality too. I'm more eclectic. I like starting things rather than completing them. But I went after the university associates work and completed that as intern. And I decided to write a book every year if I could, and I did about 4 or 5 of those. Then I pursued a human resource degree and got my master's in human resources. And then I pursued coaching with Gestalt Institute until I was certified in that, and continued to work with this counseling work, and the consulting studying that just keeps emerging. And while some of the fundamental principles that we used 20 years ago are still valid, there's also all kinds of nuances and realities about the potential shifts that are happening in the culture. And so this idea that really the only skill we really need is learning. And if you're the chief learning officer, that seems to be, to me, the pivotal officer in the company, because everything else is soon obsolete. And so the knowledge we had that worked, last month probably is not going to be the same thing next month, in the nuances that are emerging all the time. So this very idea of accepting the fact that I don't know,
Yes. Yes.
and that discomfort of not knowing creates some energy for pursuit of better knowing.
Yes.
And so, what is it I don't know, and what are the fields that I have yet to explore? I love to study quantum physics because there's so much going on in our world that are based on these theories, and they apply in behavioral science all the time. So studying quantum physics just keep opening up these new ideas about what's happening in the systems we're working in. So
Mm-hmm.
all of that, is not about I'm the pride that I have, but the humility I have in
Mm-hmm.
that there's so much yet to learn, and to never believe I know it.
Yes.
And when I
Yes.
enter into a client's system, to not come in as the expert, but the explorer and the 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 inquisitor, if you will.
Yes. Well, and I think, Kurt, what I hear you saying too is this, and it is, I think, as people of faith, we know this too, sort of this lifelong, I might say this awkwardly, but this lifelong refining of your own. You always talk about leading from center, understanding your value framework and understanding what that really means for you, right? And we spend a great deal of life um, figuring that out and shaping that. And once we gain increasing clarity, and I think as we age and mature, we gain more and more increasing clarity around that value framework to figure out where can I best live into that and live from that in spaces that allow me to be the being that God has uniquely designed me to be. I think about the work that we're going to be doing at Kesmeric. We are always and ever becoming, right? Whether it's an institution, an organization, or a self. And I think as we've created our philosophy of learning for the company over these last 2 months, I started in early June, thinking about this idea of beauty of intellect and this belief in sort of the democratization of learning for all. I mean, you want to look at a varied organization. I'm working with folks who really have not had a great learning experience, right? They may be an entry-level floor worker, working general labor jobs, and or to the folks who are helping design literally our $500,000 vehicles that we manufacture through our SpeedCore Automotive Group. This is an array of individuals. Or
Sure.
my meeting yesterday with highly trained industrial engineers. But everyone has a beautiful intellect. And so this idea of valuing curiosity, of believing in the power of perseverance and grit over genius and talent. I think that's an important one. This sense of how can we really come alongside individuals. And this can happen in an array of contexts. I am really excited about the opportunity at Casmeric to do this with such an array of people. Excuse me, I don't have COVID, I just have allergies. And so to do this with an array of folks just really suits me. And I think in terms of my decision to enter into this, frankly, really scary space. I mean, what does Gretchen Jameson know about manufacturing? And not a whole lot. But I think I know a bit about learning, and I think I know a bit about change, and I think I know a bit about how to value people and their potential. And so I think I can be really helpful. So I think that's, for me as a leader right now, this really interesting, I mean, it's a completely different space. I walk through with a smile on my face going, how did I end up here? What am I doing? Because if I was only looking at the transactional part of it, it makes no sense.
Yeah. Well, first of all, good for you that you have a job where you have this sense of passion and purpose. The really cool thing about adult learners is that they choose to pick what they really want to know. And so for me, we do this cornerstone factor thing where the being, the capacity, and the competency.
Mm-hmm.
So their level of competency is where they choose to grow and where they choose to stop growing.
Yeah.
And oftentimes there's a capacity, as you said. There are people who are frontline factory workers all the way to top science engineers, and yet if you looked at their capacity, you'd see another whole array that is quite interesting. So um, I think that the being of individuals is so
Mm-hmm.
deeply wonderful and has such great potential, which is I think been shown over and over again in some of our impoverished neighborhoods, that where we would say, here's a community that doesn't have the skill sets, doesn't have the capabilities or the competencies, and yet nonetheless you find capacity for great passion, for great understanding, for faith, and for ability to act with justice and humility.
Mm-hmm.
So those kind of qualities, those are not ascribed to what we might consider the competencies of our work, but they really apply to the capacity, and they're
Mm-hmm.
universal.
Yeah.
And from a
Well,
spiritual perspective, that spiritual perspective, that's the unique, powerful value of every individual,
mm-hmm.
every creature of God.
I know we've both been reading
Yeah.
this particular book, right? And full shout out to my friend Dan Speckhard, who's the CEO at Lutheran World Relief, and had just said, you got to read this. He read it during the shutdown, and the idea that we spend the first half of our life sort of building the container. And that's all the things that go into our identity, right? Achieving and actualizing an identity. And Kurt, you can speak to this much more elegantly than I, but this idea that the titles and the learning and all those pieces and figuring out the vessel. I love that idea. And then figuring out in the second half, and it has nothing to do with age per se, it's figuring out in the second half what the vessel is meant to, as he puts it, hold or do. That to me is just, this book found me at exactly the right point in my own leadership, right? I've had in 24 years, a lot of wonderful titles, a lot of wonderful and bizarre leadership opportunities at a very young age. I mean, when I look just at when you met me with the gathering, I think about my colleague, Mark Kiesling, who was also new that year. I mean, we were like 26 years old. I mean, who puts a pair of 26-year-olds in charge of like kind of a budget? Nobody does this. So, and through it all, my husband, Leon, and I would have these conversations. What are we being prepared to do? What's going to be demanded of us, or what are we going to be invited to do? And there's personal answers to that, right? Who knew at age 41 I would get to battle breast cancer? Who knew that we would have a 10-year wait till we could have our family? There's these things that we were being prepared for, but also these leadership challenges and this opportunity for influence. And I think where I'm going with this is, it's a perspective that I would invite anyone listening to this webcast to adopt into your life, that there's this part of your work on this earth that is the forming of the vessel, figuring out who you are, your identity, and what that means. And that's really important work. And as he talks about in the book, as Roar talks about in the book, it's necessary work. But I love, and if I may, I'm not going to read the whole passage, but he talks about how the container itself has to stretch, die in its present form, or even replace itself with something better. The first container must fail you so that the wonderful fullness of the second half of the journey can occur.
Right.
This idea of new wine in old wineskins, I think. So I invite any leader on this call, whether you are young or veteran, to adopt that perspective of this sense of forming who I am, and then what am I supposed to do with that?
Yeah, and not to to resist the temptation to identify yourself by what you do.
Yeah.
And so there's always that basic Jungian philosophy that I blur my sense of who I am by what I'm doing. And so that's why in some of the positions we have are such archetypal challenges, like you're a pastor. Well, now that starts defining who I am. I'm a DC. I'm a consultant. I'm a chief learning officer. I'm the chief strategist. So and that we spend so much time on that visible transactional part of our life that we think that starts becoming it because it's more measurable. And the
Yes.
reality is, we need to learn to let go of that. It's going to be there. It's always going to be there. Um, and how do we learn to let go? Because the more we let go of, the more awaits us, and the
Mm-hmm.
more we have this sense of self that's beyond our activities, and have this sense of self of who we are in relationship to God, where all honesty is is front and center. Um, then we grow. So Covey talks about that seventh habit of being able to let go, to not be in charge.
Yeah.
Let go of the idea that we're in charge, because we're really in charge of very little. We're in charge of our thoughts about our feelings, and we're in charge of our behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, well, just work on those. And as a Christian, we even let go of that and say,
Yeah.
my thoughts about my feelings are instructed by my faith, and my actions are instructed by my faith. And so I'm completely empty myself. And again, that fundamental Christian archetype of the God of all power
Mm-hmm.
emptied himself completely to be human form. So how do we empty ourselves? Because when we do that, all of a sudden we're more present in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
We're more intuitive of what's going on around us. We're more aware of our own power and limitations of our power, and we don't seek external kind of manipulations, but rather we're able to influence the system. And
Yes.
uh, it's a gestalt training process, but we discover over and over the phenomenological power of just being present and letting go.
Yes.
And if leaders could do that, they would be surprised. Instead of taking charge and instead of working towards something, they would actually just create space for something
Yes.
and be
Well, Kurt,
present. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I was struck by something that you said because it sounded like me. Maybe that's why I was struck by it. And thinking about, you talked about all the things that you do. I talk about things that I do. Those things give me value. And I think in a lot of ways, those are the, here's what got me there or got me here is, well, you're reliable. You do this, you do that. And I heard you talking about just now, as you try to make that move towards like real leadership is about not just the doing, but who you are. And I heard you just talking about this idea of being present. And maybe is that, I mean, would you say that's the first step? Because my question was going to be, so if I'm a leader who knows that they're stuck in the do, like I know that I'm stuck there. I know I'm stuck in thinking I have to be a better leader by doing this, and maybe doing this is how do I take charge or make it look like I know what I'm doing? What are some of those first steps you think to that emerging leadership that is better than just doing and trying to prove yourself somehow?
Well, you know, my meeting guidelines, the first one is always be here, be present. But you know, when we get stuck, it's also helpful when a group gets stuck. Uh, sometimes when I'm working with a group and they're stuck, and obviously we're high centered on something, uh, the best strategy is to just kind of let go and feel what's going on inside of me as a human. And chances are, what's going on inside of me as a human, even where my body hurts,
Yes.
gives me a key insight of what's going on. And if I lean into it, just kind of experience it, all of a sudden, there it is. It's my body connected to my soul, connected to my thinking, that allows me to get new insight. Now, I know this sounds bizarre, but it's a phenomenological process that really is leadership potential.
100%. Can I say, Kurt, just the other day, I was working with a young staffer who's going to be a part of our learning shop, and she managed a meeting beautifully, but there was some pushback on a sense of limitation that was being introduced into the room. And this young woman so eloquently said to me in our kind of debrief session, I haven't felt that way in a long time, where I actually felt myself get hot, like physically warm, right? And I stopped her and I said, I am way to go. Your awareness of how that felt. So let's talk about that. What happened? What had been said? What
Yes.
was the resistance that you felt? And then we talked about some strategies to manage that, because I think, and she did manage it beautifully. She was a collegiate athlete. She knows how to manage physiological challenges. I would submit athletes often can do that really well. But just the fact that she had that awareness, and it's this issue, Leah, to your question, this issue of presence also, I think, invites us as leaders to adopt, what do I care more about, influence or control? And early in my career, I cared about control. Control in the classroom, control because you want it, because it's feeding your sense of identity. I think if I can't control this situation, I must not be a very good X, Y, or Z. Neighbor girl is walking over and is about to ring my doorbell. Give me just a second. I'm going to mute real quick. Okay, gang? Kurt, sure. Hold that thought.
That's a great thing.
Real life is really happening, right? As we're actually doing this is just how it is.
Another chance to influence.
There you go.
My teen daughter is on it. She's already there. She's there. No, but this idea of what do I care about more, influence or control? And early in our careers, I think we feel like if I can't get this room or this group or this person to do what I want them to do, I'm a terrible teacher. I'm a terrible communications director. I'm not a very good PR director. My identity is threatened, as opposed to releasing that, recognizing your identity is okay. How can I influence this situation? And that's real leadership. I mean, that really is fundamentally.
Plus that's empowerment. It says that you fundamentally trust the individuals to have their best own interests in mind, and that their capability is their issue. So some may have big issues and are not going to get there, but that's really their stuff. And they're not going to get there by you trying to coerce them into some new attitude. But you can create a space where it becomes more and more obvious to them that there's consensual validation in the room that says they don't fit. But
Mm-hmm.
the majority of the process itself. So it's not, when we say we don't want to control, it's not like we've let go of
Right.
our behavior in shaping this
Yeah.
issue. So we want to be very much in charge of shaping the process, but it's more of like holding the group in this safe zone and
Mm-hmm.
allowing them to be the adults they choose to be, and letting the awareness of their conversation bring new learning into the group, and people will act on that learning based on their readiness.
Yeah.
And
And that takes
if I believe I'm in charge of that,
you
I'm
got a
gonna
world of hurt coming, right? And
not gonna
frustration.
get
And I think too, it's a lifelong process, because these same things play out in our home systems and in our relational dynamics, right? We know that. It's a lifelong process of recognizing and shelving your ego, which is super hard. And again, for those of us who are Christ followers and people of the book, we understand that that's a daily, like, drown that old Adam, because that ego, ooh, it creeps in there
sure.
and wants you to take control and wants you to exercise. And we're seeing it culturally, right? This sort of, and I don't care where you fall on the mask issue, we are seeing people lose their minds. This overreaction on either side to any sense of limitation is actually an indicator of incredibly immature, poorly formed leaders. I mean, you're not influencing anything in those shouting matches, right? And so we're in this remarkable moment where the juniors are leading the crowd on all sides. It was interesting. Rohr talks about that in the book, and he says, without elders, and he doesn't mean by age, he means by this kind of thoughtfulness and approach. Much of our history has been formed by juniors reacting, overreacting, and protecting their own temporary privilege with no deep time vision, like the Iroquois nation, who would always consider what would be better for the next 7 generations. Man, that is hard work. And I think as an emerging leader, which is a lifelong label that I think great leaders will own and embrace, we have to say, what is my philosophy? Why do I want to lead? And to actually take time with crafting that for yourself. I know I have. And for me, it's summed up simply as this: that the folks I am blessed and led to serve in that moment as their leader are a better version of themselves when the Lord leads me on to the next endeavor.
Sure. Yeah,
Not that I'm better, that they're better.
yeah, that's Greenleaf's definition of the leader. Are the followers wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to be leaders?
Right?
Yeah, yeah.
So guys, we have just a couple of minutes left. I cannot believe it's already been like 37 minutes. How does that happen in this kind of conversation?
Because Kurt and I can talk all day.
I know. I'm just going to go. You guys just keep going. You got it. But would love to hear before we do wrap up, for folks, because they might have other work they have to go do. They have to go do some things while they're being. Okay, this is a reality. But before we do that, I want to just go back to something you just said, Gretchen, because I thought, again, a lot of times I'm looking for what's the starting point for someone trying to get on a journey like the one that you all are talking about. And I loved your question of thinking through the philosophy of why do I want to lead, which makes you deal with some of these other pieces you guys have talked about, influence versus control, doing versus being, fighting your ego, all those kind of pieces. What does Christ and who he has made me and who he calls me have to do with all that? Really appreciate those kind of thoughts and those kind of starting points. And would wonder, as we get ready to wrap up, if each of you maybe has one more, here's a resource that you would share, or a next step that you might share with folks as they're kind of on their own journey of transformational leadership.
I'll go first and then let Kurt hold forth, because he's the guru. And I mean that actually quite seriously. Honestly, Leah, I think yes, I've earned a doctorate in organizational change and leadership. So yes, keep learning, keep finding those resources. And there's no end of podcasts and webcasts like this. But I think the greatest gift that I received was, frankly, a coach like Kurt, someone that you can be very transparent with. I always like to think of who's sitting at your table. If you had a board of directors for your life, who's at the table? Who are you letting at your table? And there's a great new book by Louis Giglio where he talks about don't give the enemy a seat at your table, which is a whole other podcast we could do. But who is at your table, and to hold that group close, and to not be bashful to ask people to be a part of your group. So Kurt found me. Kurt has said very hard things to me over the years. I mean, Kurt, you know some of the ones I'm talking about, really hard things that I probably, Gretchen Jameson, because I can be a bit of a sass, wouldn't let many other people, if anybody besides probably Kurt or like my dad, say these things to me. So people that find you, but then don't be bashful about asking someone to maybe go on that journey with you. I sort of did that with my friend, Reverend Dr. John Nunes, who actually I'm picking up tomorrow to drive to the airport. I mean, I'm willing to spend I rearranged my day to find 30 minutes, with this gentleman who's become such an important voice. I reached out to Joni Schultz. She's the creative director of group publishing. You all may have heard of Joni. I was
say hi to her.
Late 20 somethings. I will. And I literally sent her a note and said, hi, you don't know me. I admire you. Can I talk with you? So I think that type of, who do you want at your table?
Oh, she's fabulous.
It's a critical decision as a leader to make. Really critical.
Yeah, I thank you. I think that idea of a board of directors is pivotal. And I'm trying to think I could be more intentional about that for myself. I'm a journaler. I like to journal. It's just one form of kind of keeping your head straight. I always start with selfishness and I end up with reality and honesty with God. And I think 2 points. One, and this is Ed Freeman. If I had a resource, I would say Ed Freeman and The Failure of Nerve. That book right now it's a must read. It's like a clear definition of what's going on in our country right now. I mean, without a doubt, he dissects the reality of the systems and how systems fail when leadership does not have self-identification and clarity. So Ed Freeman, Failure Nerve. The other, and in that is a piece that all leaders need to recognize. And if we could embrace the fact that no matter what the problem is us, then a lot of things would resolve themselves. And so instead of finding blame or putting it off on others, just eventually get to the self. And that's what my journaling does. I start off kind of picking up the problem. Why is this problem? And I go after it. And then I end up with, yeah, Kurt, but the reality is only you can fix this.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you going to change in your own behavior? What's going to change in your behavior to make this different? And so, and that's an Ed Friedman kind of fundamental.
Can I tag onto that, Kurt? Leah, I can say this. That piece of wisdom that Kurt just shared, anyone listening, adopt it now. Kurt, you brought that into the room at a youth ministry staff retreat. We were in New Orleans, I want to say. This was years ago. And we kept putting the problem out in the hall. We kept putting that problem out in the hall, and it was out there. And you graciously, as you always do, said, get that thing in the room, because if you don't put the problem in the room, you can't do anything about it. And then you're just forced into this posture of victimhood and kind of forced into this, right, self-effacing sort of, oh, poor us. Bring it in the room. So I would, friends who are listening, adopt that principle. And the other one, Kurt, that you've always talked about is, and I'm going to say this in a very clumsy way, is this idea that kind of fully functional adults speak their needs 100% of the time, that we're clear, not in a non-anxious way, but we speak our needs and we have clarity. Those two principles that I've learned from you over the years, game changers, just absolute game changers.
Gretchen, thank you for that. And thank you for being here with us today and joining us in our audience. Kurt, would you mind just kind of sharing briefly what we're hoping is coming down the pike with Emergent Leader? Things are still obviously a little up in the air, but what are we hoping for in this next year? What do you think?
Well, I'm really excited. I had a conversation with President Walton in Florida, Georgia, as he's extended now another year, as all district presidents have, and he's really hoping that we can do another Emergent Leader 10-day in person, and we want to um, put that out there as soon as we can when we have dates, and rally the team back together, and think in terms also of how there might be another future when the senior staff here is moving into other things. So exciting stuff in the future. We thought that there would just be a temporary thing, and I think the reality is this is going to be a part of our who we are. Understanding how to manage in the middle of a lot of chaos, and it would be wonderful to be together again because there's just much greater learning when you're in the room together and in the hallways together.
One of the hallways. Well, we will.
Anyway,
We'll
but
keep you
thank
all
you.
updated on
I
those
thank you,
pieces.
Gretchen. Thank you so much, Gretchen. I just really value your leadership in our church, and I really am grateful for the fact that you'll continue to be a leader, even in the role you're in, which seems to be corporate, but the church is way beyond those kind of self-ascribed boundaries. God's going to use you, and we're all better for it. Thank you, Gretchen.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be with you today. Truly, truly glad to be a part of the conversation.
All right, well, keep up with us, folks, if you are looking for updates. You also can watch all of the previous episodes of Emergent Leader Live and read some great articles by our awesome facilitators of that process on emergentleader.org. Be well.